Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. The hope is that this is a quick video, but you know me, sometimes I ramble. I still probably get more questions about the resting type Dendrobiums than all the other stuff put together, quite honestly. And it is a subject that is fraught with difficulties, and yet it's not. I think the simple question to ask is, what are we trying to replicate here? And the answer is where they come from. Now that's not as easy to find out as it might sound, but you know, the information is out there. Orchidspecies.com will normally give you a clue in saying needs to be drier in the winter. There's various places you can find the information from, but obviously if you're talking about a species as such, the two important things to differentiate are, does it come from an evergreen forest or does it come from a deciduous forest? If it comes from an evergreen forest, it doesn't rest. Otherwise the trees wouldn't stay green. It's just thinking about the environment. If there was a winter period that was harsh enough, the leaves would dump their trees, and only certain types of trees would be capable of putting up with that. They would thrive, the others would not. So that's the same circumstances for the orchids. If an orchid has decided that it will grow best in deciduous forests, there's a reason. And the reason is normally that it's basically evolved and adapted to work that way. So we're trying to replicate that. So there's only three factors that you need to consider. Is first of all, how high up does it grow? Because that will give you a clue as to what sort of low nighttime temperatures it might be subjected to. The higher up, the cooler it gets. Yeah? So you can get some Dendrobium species that are down in the valleys of deciduous forests where it might not get as cold as up, you know, at the top of the tree line where even the trees can't grow. You know, it's just too cold. But, you know, there's a variance there. But I'm confident, I will say, and this year is a bit of a test with my own plants, is that it's the drop in temperature, the difference, that triggers the rest, triggers that sort of dormant period. And it's just literally the difference between the temperatures it was used to and what it gets in that winter period. Well, there's another factor. Is there a real winter where the place, you know, where the orchid comes from? You know, because some places have a wet and a dry season, yes, but the temperatures don't vary huge amounts. You know, and you'll often find that in those places you've got the proliferation of evergreen plants and trees, because it doesn't get cold. They don't need to have a dormant period. But going back to the Dendrobiums, obviously some of them get that. I still question whether they need it or whether that's just where they live and it's what they get and they've evolved and adapted to put up with it. There's a difference. Yeah? Now that is difficult to establish without long-term experimentation with single plants, you know, and trying things out yourselves or listening to others that have already done those trials. But I'm confident that the drop in temperature, especially at the nights, is some form of trigger that over a period of time it starts those buds off. Okay, so I'm happy that that happens. The next thing to think of is most orchids don't stick out the top of the trees. You know, they grow in amongst the branches and on the trunks and stuff like that. So if they come from deciduous forests, for a fair part of the year, they are at least shaded, or at the very least semi-shaded. They might get little shafts of sunlight coming in through the canopy now and again, but they're basically shaded because the leaves are on the trees. So their growing season doesn't need the high light. I don't mean keeping them in the dark and in the deep shadows. That's not the sort of area they come from. I mean, if you've ever walked in a tropical forest, unless you're in the deepest of jungles, then it is light. It's an airy, light sort of atmosphere, unless it's a montane forest, in which case it's misty and foggy, and you've probably got your coat on, because it's quite cool too. But getting back to the light, obviously in the autumn the leaves drop. So on sunny days, they're not all sunny days, but during that period they're getting a lot more light than they would have done under the shade of those leaves. Yeah? So for me, I believe that is also one of the main triggers. And then you have to consider the watering and feeding aspect. Well, if the rains virtually stop, in the main it's the rain that washes down the nutrients from above onto the plants and onto their roots. Well, if those rains virtually stop and the only moisture is either in the air or from the morning dew, the feed has dropped to nothing, or virtually nothing. It just isn't there anymore because the washing process is not there. So you can understand the logic of stopping the feed as you go into your rest period, because that's probably what happens. So that's again logical. The zero water idea, I totally disagree with. And I'm not having that, because I don't believe there is anywhere where orchids grow where there is zero water naturally on a year in, year out basis. There's going to be some moisture. It's either in the air due to a bit of fog and mist, especially in the mornings, or it's due to the morning dew. That's a process that's almost impossible to stop. You know, even in an atmosphere like here in England, you know, it happens even in the summer. You know, when the humidity level of the air is pretty low, as the temperature drops down, it reaches a point where condensation forms. It's just a natural process. So they get a bit of moisture, and I'm happy that that's what happens. So what you're trying to replicate is a drop-off in feed dramatically to, I would suggest, virtually zero, if not zero. That's easy to do. Just stop feeding. You know, it's harder to feed than it is not to. Bear in mind the water you use. If you've got a high TDS reading on the water you use before you even put any feed in there, then you're not giving them zero feed. You might not know what you're giving them, but you're giving them something. So get down near the rainwater, RO water, something along those lines that you know has a very, very low TDS reading. And then you can be happy that whatever your resting dendrobiums are getting is devoid of feed. Because you haven't put any in there. And there was very little in there to start with, so that's what they're getting. I'm happy with that. As far as the watering is concerned, it isn't a magic switch. You know, that doesn't happen out in the real world either. The rains slow up over a period of time. Well, that's relatively easy to replicate. You can either water the same amount a lot less frequently, or do what I do and just reduce the amount they get and then gradually reduce the frequency as well. Now I start doing this, or I certainly did this year, about the end of November, beginning of December. And again, it depends a lot on the weather and the temperatures and how cool it's getting at night and things like that. But just adjust things down on a gentle basis until such time as your dendrobiums are getting very, very little water, no feed, and the brightest light you can give them. A lot of them are going to drop their leaves, so it's not like you're going to get leaf burn if the light's too high, because most of them haven't got any, they've dropped them. It's a natural process, like with the trees and a lot of the shrubs, and you know, a lot of plants just totally go underground for the winter period and come back up again in the spring, blink their eyes in the new season. So that's all we're trying to do, is just replicate a deciduous forest given the temperatures, given the light level, and given the natural effect of the rains coming to a virtual halt. So that's all we're trying to do. And as long as you keep those factors in mind, it's not too bad. Now, if you've got resting type dendrobiums in a house, I mean, I don't know what your house is like, but my house don't get that cold. So I wouldn't be able to replicate those cold night temperatures under normal circumstances in a house. I did try it the previous winter by using an unheated bedroom, and I put all my resting dendrobiums on the windowsill in that room. It didn't work for me. The air was too dry, and it was also still. And I lost some plants. I'm not prepared to do that again. Some of them went into that rest a bit weak. Well, some of those never came out the other end. They never woke up. So I'm reluctant to do that. So all my resting dendrobiums have stayed here. I made arrangements for the light by removing all shade netting and getting all my resting dendrobiums away from any shading from other plants. So they're all up in the roof. Oh, it's funny, this thing. I love it to bits, but wherever it is, it's in the flipping way. Let me just move that down there somewhere, preferably without dropping it. There we go. Yep, so my resting dendrobiums are close to the glass. They're up high. They get as much light as I can give them. The water and feed is under my control, as is the low temperatures at night. Now, because I have a mixed collection and some things in here don't like getting too cold, I have to have a balance. Now, at the moment, for the next 2 or 3 weeks, I'm actually going to lower my nighttime temperature. And for those plants that are not going to like it so much, well, they're going to have to put up with it, and they're not going to get it for too long. But I'm going to drop my minimum temperature down. It's not much, but it's a drop. And it's at the time of year where they come from where it would be their coldest point. And also I've found out from looking at weather reports and things like that, that when the rains do slow down to that almost stop, because of the rainy season, everything's still soaking wet, so there's an awful lot of fog and mist around as they go into that winter period. But then gradually, on the odd sunny day, a lot of that moisture evaporates. So heading towards the end of their winter rest period, it does actually get a lot drier, and as a consequence can get a bit colder as well. As we all know, on sort of misty, cloudy sort of atmospheres, temperature doesn't seem to drop as much as if it would on a clear, on a clear night with the clear skies. So I'm going to try and replicate that a little bit by just allowing the nighttime temperature to drop down that extra little bit. So instead of having a minimum of, well, it's actually 13 at the moment, I'm going to let it go down to 12. But I daren't go any lower than that because of the other things that are in here. The Latorias, the Phalaenopsis type dendrobiums, quite a few of the warmer growing Oncidium types, Miltonias, they're not going to like getting too cold, and certainly my Vandas aren't going to like it. But then they're not growing much this time of year anyway. Another degree isn't going to hurt them. So that's all we're trying to replicate, is what happens where they come from. So the elevation is important. That'll determine the nighttime lows. The higher up they get, the cooler it's going to get. That's just simple logic. If they come from a deciduous forest and it gets colder in the winter and all the leaves are off, that's what we're trying to replicate. That extra light, lower temperatures and a massive reduction in watering, and stop the feed. So the concept is easy enough, but whether your environment you can actually achieve it or not, all you can do is get as close as you can. But a word of warning from my own experience: if you're going to let your dendrobiums dry out, and keep them quite dry for quite long periods of time, I wouldn't recommend having a dry air around them as well, because I believe that's how I lost some. That's not what the real world's like. You don't get that dry atmosphere. And they still need some air movement around them. They still need that. Again, that just happens out in the real world. The air just moves. It's very rarely dead still with no movement at all. So keep your atmosphere buoyant. Keep it feeling comfy. And try and get those nighttime temperatures down. try and get as much bright light as you can. Drop your feed off to next to nothing, you know, during late November or into late November. You can start doing it earlier than that if you want. But watch your plants. If you've still got active growth at the beginning of November, then slow that feed down slowly. Don't go mad and stop it dead. And just see how things go. If you don't want these problems, then don't get resting type Dendrobiums. But I love them, and I like that challenge. And we will see how mine come out the end of it this year with the changes I've made. I do hope to see substantial improvements in blooming and quality of growth next year, because I believe they've now had the best rest I can do. So if you've got them, good luck with them. If you haven't, this video's not for you. But it's not a panic. It's not difficult. It may be difficult to achieve, but the concept you're trying to achieve isn't difficult. So it's only a few factors. Get that light up, get those nighttime temperatures down, and if you live in a place where that doesn't happen, that will be difficult. Well, perhaps those types of Dendrobiums are not for you then. You know, I've always said, get the plants that are suited to your environment, and you know, if you live in those constantly warm countries, they might not do as well for you. So, but there's plenty of other things that will. You know, there's a wealth of choices in the orchid world. And by getting the ones that suit your environment and where you live and what you can do, you get happy orchids. Happy orchids equals happy people, happy growing. Okay, so just a quick chat on the resting types. We had a look at some of them. We did a bud hunt a while ago, and we have some. And I'll be doing that again probably at the end of January. There's no point in doing it too soon after the last time. Things don't move that quick in the winter. But we'll have another look round them a bit later on. And then hopefully by the end of February I can report that we have buds everywhere. Might be wishful thinking, but that's what I'm heading at. That's what I'm looking at. So enjoy your growing, have fun, yeah, take care.